Hello, everyone. We're just going to give it maybe another 1 to 2 minutes, and then we'll start it.
I did preemptively put Galen and Sophia's contact information in the chat, so if everyone can see that, just that'll be there for you kind of throughout the webinar. And we'll, like Sophia said, we'll get started in a little bit.
Great.
Great day for a ride today.
Oh, beautiful out.
Beautiful. I think I'll go this afternoon.
There you go.
Okay, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. This looks like it's going to be more of an intimate group today. Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar, Bike Riding with Families. This is a continuation of our series of biking webinars focused on transportation and commuting options presented by Transaction Associates. My name is Sophia Gallimore and I'm a program manager at Transaction Associates, and I will be the moderator of today's webinar. Joining me are my colleagues Kelly Massachi and Julie Quinn. They're going to be assisting with the facilitation of our webinar. If this is your first time joining one of our webinars, Transaction Associates is a full-service transportation consulting company based in Reuben. We operate regional groups called TMAs, or Transportation Management Associations, and work with individual clients to manage their on-site transportation programs. Everything we do is centered around decreasing traffic congestion, improving air quality by reducing the people who drive alone. We also have a division of our company that operates shuttle services. So today you're going to hear from Galen Mook, who is the Executive Director of Mass Bike and your statewide bicycle advocacy organization. Before taking the helm at Mass Bike, Galen worked at Landry's Bicycles for 5 years and helped to start up the Hubway Bike Share Company, now known as Blue Bikes. Though he does work on an abundance of issues, including policies, legislation, funding concerns, education, and more, Galen particularly enjoys working towards conveying the basics of biking, bike safety, and with the intent of breaking comfort barriers and to get more individuals and families riding bikes daily. Today, biking with kids takes patience, constant attention, and special gear and bikes. This webinar will feature on a how-to plan for biking with little ones, including a talk on teaching the rules of the road so kids, teaching the rules of the road to kids, finding kids safe routes, and how to plan for carrying cargo in kids' seats. So before we get started today, we're just going to have a few housekeeping items. Throughout the webinar, we encourage interaction by using the chat or questions function that's on the right sidebar of your screen. We want this to be an interactive discussion. This webinar will be recorded and you will receive a follow-up email with a link to the recording so that you can share with others or watch again at a later date. There will also be a short survey in the email that we hope you will complete. So let's get started. Welcome, Galen.
Excellent. Thank you, Sophia, Kelly, and Julie. It's a pleasure to be here for another webinar with Transaction. I'm excited about today's talk as well, because we're going to be encouraging folks to get out with their little ones, and a little bit about some of the work that we've done with young riders. Mass Bike runs the Safe Routes to Schools program throughout Massachusetts. We partner with a couple other partners like Walk Boston and a few others to do education around how to ride, on-bike skills, rules and regulations, and practical tactics like locking up and carrying cargo. So I'm going to cover some of these topics in today's presentation. We have a brief PowerPoint presentation, a short video to show. We're trying to break this up in a couple of polls as well. I'm going to encourage Sophia or the rest of the Transaction crew to feel free to interrupt me at any point with any questions that might come in through the chat or come in through the Q&A. We are a smaller group today, so I'm more than happy to make this a little bit more personal. So if you want to share a story, share a success, or share a challenge that we can discuss, please feel encouraged to do so via the chat and the Q&A, which is, again, is on the right-hand side of the GoToMeeting panel. I will start by actually getting into my presentation. Let me see if I can figure this out. I don't want to show my main screen. Let me see if I can show a particular screen. Hold on one second. Let's see here. Great. And I'll encourage anybody who has any trouble hearing or seeing me to feel free to jump in too. But Sophia, can you confirm that you're seeing the slide presentation?
Yes.
Great, excellent. So I'll jump right in and we'll take a few breaks as well. So we do have some poll questions. So I kind of have forgotten, Kelly and Sophia, where we want to throw those polls in. So feel free to jump in at any time, okay? All right, so today's talk is about riding with families, and we're gonna try to focus on tips that keep you and your family safe and comfortable when riding out there. What we're gonna cover a little bit about how to carry young ones, a little bit about biking with groups of kids versus biking alone. We'll talk a little bit about infrastructure, about bike lanes, about routing, getting to the comfort level. We'll talk about how young is too young, and specifically some of the laws related, the Massachusetts state laws related to riding with young kids. We'll talk about buying kids' bikes, which I know is probably one of the biggest questions that a lot of parents have, is what size bike, what quality bike, do I really have to spend $400 on a bike? We can talk about that. We'll talk a little bit about how to teach the rules of the road to the youths, and we'll talk a little bit about the Safe Routes to Schools program, which though is independent from the TMA here, if you are part of a municipality that participates in the Safe Routes to Schools program, that means that you can get bicycling education in the school system, which might be delivered by Mass Bike at no cost to the schools. It's a state-run program through the Mass DOT. So we'll talk a little bit about that. If there's anything on this list that you have any concerns or questions about, or anything not on this list that you want me to cover, please, again, utilize the chat and utilize the Q&A. I am here for you. So don't think that I'm gonna cover all the bases today. All right. I should take a quick pause now. Sophia, do we know if we have a poll that we want to start with, or should we give it a few slides?
Kelly?
Sure, we're gonna ask a quick question. Do you ride your bike with kids? Just kind of a quick kind of test the waters, see where everyone is.
Great.
So do you ride your bike with kids? Yes, all the time, sometimes no, but I'm interested in starting to. So we'll kind of know what everyone's experience levels are. Well, again, we'll leave this open for about 30 seconds and let everyone get their votes in.
I'll also acknowledge these might not be your kids. These might be your nieces, your nephews, your neighbors. Maybe you help out with a school doing their bike ride school bus, whatever else it might be, just to get a good baseline of who is on the call.
Perfect. We have 100% of the people on the call voted. So we're going to go ahead and close this and share our results. We're even splits. Exactly 1/3 of you yes, 1/3 of you sometimes, and 1/3 no, but I'm interested in starting to. So good mix.
Excellent. Well, looks like we got all the bases to cover, so I'll try to do my best. All right, so let's talk a little bit about kids' seats. So one of the biggest questions that I used to get when I was working at Landry's Bicycles, which is a for-profit bicycle shop that has 7 stores in Eastern Massachusetts, from Worcester to Braintree and in Boston and around, is how do I carry my kids? Is it in the front or in the back? Well, it doesn't really quite matter as long as your bike is equipped with a rack or equipped with a seat that could fit in the front or the back. But I will mention that because this is a big question for parents, a couple of considerations. First is when the child is in the front, there are some pros and some cons. Some of the pros are actually that you can keep an eye on them. So you can see if they start to fuss, you can see if their helmet starts to slide a little bit, you can see if they're nodding off and kind of, you know, just fading in or fading out. It's always good to keep an eye on the kid. Some of the concerns with riding with a child in the front is over the dangers of crashing. So crashes are not common, but usually when they do occur when bicycling, you're traveling forwards, and so a lot of the impacts happen from the front. So you just have to be extra cautious and extra wary that you have a precious piece of cargo in the very front of the bike, which is the direction of your momentum. So be a little cautious about that. A little bit of pros and cons. When the child seat is in the rear, the child is a little bit less engaged with the motion. They are kind of more staring at your back, and especially if that person was wearing a backpack, it kind of gets right up in the child's face. So they aren't necessarily as immersed in the environment. It's harder to keep an eye on them. So if they do start to nod off and go to sleep in the back, or they do start to kind of slip, I wouldn't say fall out of the seat at all, because they're generally strapped in just fine. But if they just start to move around, and kids can be pretty, let's call it flexible. You just have to kind of do your due diligence as a rider to keep checking, looking over your shoulder to keep an eye on the kid. But the pros, of course, is that maneuverability wise, when the weight is in the rear of the bike, though it causes a little slight swing, it doesn't actually impact the steering as it would if the child was towards the front of the bike. The steering is in the front. And also, if there is the incident of a crash, it may be a little bit safer for the child to be in the back. Now, kids' seats like this, front or the rear, doesn't really quite matter. It's a personal preference, but they're made for kids who are just about 40 pounds or under. So if your child starts to be a little bit heavier, which I think is around the age 2 mark, you're going to want to think about moving to a different style of carrying your kid. But if they're younger, say ages 1 to 2.5 or so, under 40 pounds, then typically a kid seat like this is what you're going to go for. And notice that in both these pictures, everybody's in a helmet, but especially the kid is in a helmet. And I'll talk a little bit about that later in terms of the law, but of course, little ones need to be in a helmet, and you need to make sure that their neck is strong enough and that their head is developed enough to hold the weight up. Even though it's styrofoam, it does cause a little bit of weight for the young one. Other types of bikes to carry around kids with. So 3 different varieties here of cargo bikes and trailers. Now, for those of you living in, say, the Camberville area, you're going to see a lot of these on the streets. These have become, I would call them the modern minivan. And the beauty is that you can take the whole family without actually needing to get in an automobile. And there's a couple of ways to do it. So we'll start with the top right, which is says here, the Dutch cargo bike. There's a few different brands, but essentially it's a front-loaded cargo bike that's made specifically, and you can see it's got smaller wheels, made specifically for maneuverability with a lot of weight in the very front of the bike. These are incredibly popular in the Netherlands and other places that have slower, arguably a little bit slower bike traffic, but a little bit more integrated in with the street systems. So we'll see separated bike lanes, specific bike lights, completely separated infrastructure so that you can maneuver we'll call it a behemoth like this around in a street space without much concern. The bottom left, where you see the gentleman in the tie in front of that nice brownstone, that is actually a bike that has been modified to be extended. This model is called the Extra Cycle, but essentially it's just a more a modification to a mountain bike, which facilitates the extra cargo. You can see he's got 2 kids on the rear and the 1 kid in the front. So in terms of where the kids go in the front or the rear, you kind of have a combination of the two. And you'll see that there will be a difference of maneuverability for sure with the changing of the weight and the extension of the bike. But this is a kind of a modification of a bike, which, does take a bike shop to help you out with, but there's some relatively medium cost modifications that you can do, which frankly, I would say just a couple $100 added on aftermarket to your regular bike. And in the bottom right, you'll see the Burley trailer. These are very common, not just for hauling kids, but for hauling dogs on the bike path, or going to Home Depot and picking up some mulch or going some kitty litter. This is made for cargo as well as persons. But this is an easy modification. The Burley trailer just attaches to any normal bike with a standard quick release lever, typically on the rear wheel. It's about maybe $100, $120, $130 to get the trailer itself. Holds about 100 pounds, I would say, maybe a little bit more. But it's a hitch system that just is an aftermarket attachment to the bicycle. So it's basically, I don't know if anybody on the line is familiar with driving a tractor truck trailer, but it kind of changes your ride similar to that, where if you're making any turns or any quick maneuverability, you have to account that there's a swing in the rear. So if you are thinking about going ahead and getting the modern cargo bike or the modern minivan by bike, I recommend actually test riding a few different varieties. Try to find a shop, try to find a dealer that actually has a front-loading cargo bike and try to ride that around the neighborhood for a few minutes, see how it feels. See how it would feel if maybe a neighbor or a friend or somebody on a Facebook page or maybe a shop would sell an extra cycle, and the same with the Burley trailer, because each of the three here kind of maneuver differently. And as the adult pedaling, you're gonna have to modify your technique in order to accommodate the extra weight, the extra swing. But just to give you an idea of the different varieties. Then I should also mention that any of these varieties, or even going back to the former slide, any of these could be modified with an electric assist, or an electric assist bike could be part of the componentry that then you put a hitch and a trailer onto. So you can actually make these, even though you're adding the weight, you can actually make these pretty easy to pedal by getting an electric assist motor. I will have a little caveat that MassBike is actually working on the codification of what e-bikes are in state law. So right now it's a gray area between a moped, a motorized bicycle, and a normal bicycle. But you might see by the end of this legislative session that we've actually carved out definitions of e-bikes. So when you go to a shop, you'll actually be defined as a device that is codified in state law that would say where it's allowed, where it's not allowed on the streets. So if you're going to buy an e-bike, this is just a tangent, but keep an eye as to the regulations around where they can and can't be ridden. And if you have any questions about any of this stuff, of course, MassBike is your resource there for any of the statewide legislation. But sorry for the caveat, but I just want to throw in there that electric assist bicycles go hand in hand with having a lot of weight, such as carrying around kids. And then lastly, you can modify bikes and get tag-along bikes where the kids can actually learn to pedal along with you. And the beauty of the tag-along bikes is that they actually require the kiddo to put a little effort and energy in. So you don't have to be like the top right where you can be like the racing family, but you know, one of my favorite photos here is the bottom right one, which is actually just a foldable mount that the little boy's bike actually is a full bike. So once you get to a place where you want the kid to ride on their own, you can detach the bike from the hitch and then they get to ride two wheels on their own, which is great. The beauty of the tag-along bike or something that's a hitch modified, such as these, is that the adult still is in control of the direction and essentially the speed. Now, the kid can help pedal if you can get them to help pedal, but essentially the adult is the one who gets to brake, the one who gets to steer, and the one who gets to maneuver. So if the kid is just learning how to pedal, just learning the balance, this is a really good way to allow them to go some distance and actually go with the adult. And you can bike on the street, teach them good etiquette for riding on the roadways. But then once you get to a park, like in the bottom right, you know, I would just say pop that bike off the hitch and then they get to ride around the park all safely. So again, this is just to show different styles, different age groups, different abilities as the kid gets older, as the kid gets more developed in their skill set. You can have different modifications for these. I'll take a quick pause there and I'll encourage any questions, any Q&A, and I'll also ask Kelly if you wanted to, we have a quick 2-minute video to show, which is a very bare bones video. I will say not a lot of production value, but that goes into a little bit about how to teach how to ride from a pedaling standpoint. And this is something MassBike just mocked up, not specifically for this presentation, but it's just one of our tools that we use. And again, very low production value, but I want to kind of break up the monotony of a presentation to show you in real time what it can be about learning to ride as a, you know, as a 4-year-old, as a 5-year-old.
How to teach yourself or your child to ride a bike. You might need to make some bike adjustments. Make sure that you can reach the ground.
Can you girls reach the ground?
Yep.
When you are sitting on the seat, you should be able to put both feet on the ground.
If one of my feet are totally on, my other one isn't. So I can only do that.
Tiptoes.
Yeah, tiptoes are good.
You don't want the seat too low, so your tiptoes or balls of your feet should just reach the ground. Though for young children or those without a much developed sense of balance, you can lower the seat so that the feet can completely touch the ground. If you find that your ankles are bumping into the pedals as you do this, you can remove them until you are ready, usually using an Allen key or hex wrench. If you are having trouble removing the pedals, you can go to the nearest bike shop and they will be able to help you to do this. Step 1, falling and catching yourself. Start by picking both feet way off the ground and then tipping to one side gently, then putting your foot down on the side you tip towards to catch yourself. Repeat with the other leg. This is to help develop the sense that even if you start to fall, you are able to catch yourself. Step 2 is gliding. Sitting on your bike, push off with your feet and then hold them off the ground and try to glide for as long as possible. The bigger the push, the faster you go, and the easier it will be to stay upright. Once you're able to glide while staying upright, try gliding and steering. But when you're doing this, make sure to keep your head up and look about 2 feet in front of you. It is much harder to keep your balance if you're busy looking down at the pedals. As far as brakes are concerned, if you feel out of control, remember you can lightly grab your brakes to slow down. Avoid grabbing the brakes suddenly, as this may cause you to lose control by jolting yourself to a stop. Pedaling. Once you are comfortable at gliding long distances, you can try pedaling. Put one foot on the pedal and lean on the opposite foot. The ball of your foot should sit on the pedal, then push off using the opposite foot until you gather a decent speed as you are gliding forward, and try to reach for the pedal. Remember to keep your gaze 2 feet in front of you while you do this instead of trying to look down at the pedal. As soon as your second foot is on the pedal, push forward on the pedal so that you can maintain your speed. Often the instinct is to backpedal or pedal backwards, which will not give you the momentum you need to stay upright. If you're having trouble reaching the pedals, have someone help hold you upright so you can get a feel for pedaling. Remember, if you're having trouble staying upright long enough to reach the pedal, the best thing is to try pushing off a few times until you're going a little faster than you may be comfortable with.
It's better to start off fast because then if you go quicker, it's easier to ride like this. See? About a week.
About a week.
It took me about 10 weeks, and now here I am biking. I'm very proud.
Did you start with training wheels or no training wheels?
I didn't use. Once you actually get it, it's fun. And once you put all the details from these videos together, you actually get biking.
Whee! Look at him go. So good at pedaling.
Excellent. Well, just a quick little interlude there. I'm interested in any thoughts or any questions anybody wants to pop into the chat, but otherwise I'll jump right back into the presentation.
No questions yet, Galen, thanks. We'll
All right.
interrupt you if we have some come in.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Great. So the purpose of that video was actually made for a 3rd grade class in the city of Cambridge, was just to show to parents, because the students are doing remote learning, to encourage them to get out and actually try to teach their kids how to ride from these virtual times. So just a little context there. But yeah, the big tips that we can have there, if you're just learning how to ride, I don't recommend training wheels. Training wheels are crutches essentially, and they don't actually teach balance to the little one. And the first thing that you need when you're learning how to ride a bike is balance. So no training wheels, a scoop on the ground to glide, and then if they get that in about 90 minutes, I guarantee you're going to want to pop them full of some Starburst or some sugar candies, and then encourage them to just pedal, 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 and chances are you'll get it. So if you have any experiences teaching little ones how to ride, please feel free to contribute in the chat. Well, what does it mean to actually get the child riding, and how do you then handle when you're actually going places, especially in the city streets? So one of the best things to have, of course, is a group of people. There is safety in numbers when you are riding a bicycle. So you'll see in the photograph here, this is actually my friend Annika and her family on their bike to school day from a couple years ago. And you'll notice a couple of things. From the photograph, you'll see that the adults are in the rear, so that the child is actually the one who gets to be in front and actually the one making the decisions about the turns, and kind of gets to understand a little bit of the real world without having a guide in front of her. However, the traffic in the back is going to see the adults first, especially wearing the high-vis vests, and be a little extra cautious. You'll notice that Annika is actually riding a little bit in on the bike lane, so a little bit further away from moving traffic. This would be a little bit of a concern if there were parked cars between the bike lane and the curb, because I'm sure we're all familiar with the door zone bike lanes. We'll talk about that in a minute. But typically, you know, the inherent nature of riding on the roadways is going to encourage the little ones to ride closer into the curb. So you're going to have to be very instructive about making sure that they are watching out for any car doors that might open up if they're riding next to parked cars. And you're going to want to be extra patient when riding. So stopping with the large group, even if the intersection has a light that's green, you're going to want to keep an eye, and it might turn yellow to red before the whole group passes through. So you would encourage the front lead rider, in this example, Annika, and the pink bike and the purple basket, to actually pause maybe at every intersection to recollect and make sure that they're very visible and known. Do you have any other tips that you've learned when you're riding with your groups? Please feel free to share them. This is by no means an exhaustive list, but just some food for thought to keep your brain juices when you're out and riding. But the biggest thing is that you have to be very attentive, and you have to be very instructional with the little ones to showcase some real world examples and maybe talk them through the examples so they kind of get a sense of what's going on. You're going to want to pick routes that have good bicycling infrastructure. Now, this is a slide that I pulled that I generally use to showcase the varieties of infrastructure, and this is by no means everything that's out there, but these are the common levels of infrastructure. You'll see that they range from just a sharrow in the middle of a lane all the way down to a protected sidewalk level bike lane, but we'll talk through these just for a few minutes. So on a route, say you're going from home to library or home to school, you may encounter a route that has all of these types of infrastructure and no infrastructure all on the same stretch of road. Some actually provide physical separation, vertical separation, protected barriers between moving traffic and the biker. And for a little rider, and I would say ages maybe 8 or 10 years old, you're going to want to find the off-road networks the best as possible. But sometimes that's not feasible. So just so you're familiar, there are some varieties of infrastructure. So the top left is called a sharrow, and all that really does is it enforces to the driver of the vehicles, of the cars, that there will be bicyclists typically in the center of the road, because this is a low traffic, slow enough street that we don't need to separate and segregate out the modes. There might not be enough space for a bike lane. The traffic volumes might not be high enough to require a bike lane. So you're going to want to talk through with the little ones what it means to actually share the space with the drivers, which means making eye contact, which means wearing very bright and visible clothing. And yes, it might mean, if they're old enough and on a comfortable enough street, it might mean actually being in the middle of the roadway, mixing in with all the rest of the traffic. Now, the top right is a bike lane. This is a standard old bike lane wedged in between parked cars and moving traffic. You'll notice even on this bike lane, there's a little bit of a paint buffer between the parked cars and the bike lane. And that's to encourage the biker to be a little bit further out from the parking so that if a door opens up, they won't be struck. But you'll notice that this doesn't do anything to prevent vehicles from actually entering the bike lane. So the trolleys, the taxis, the Uber drivers, the commercial vehicles still will be prevalent in their curbside parking. So it does create a conflict point in the bike lane. So this is by no means safe. What this does teach is it teaches bikers to kind of generally stay to the right-hand side of a wider lane, because people on bicycles are generally slower traffic and should be towards the right-hand side of the roadway. It teaches bikers to ride one direction, which means with traffic. So you'll see the arrows with the bike symbol encourages bikers to go the direction of traffic, which is very good to teach little ones, because keep in mind, they have not gone through RMV training and do not have a license and don't actually know the rules about all traffic needing to go the same direction on the right-hand side. So this is a good reinforcement there. And it's nice to have a little bit of space, but we'll talk in a minute about how that space might actually not be wide enough to actually do separation as we need it. The bottom right photograph is a parking protected bike lane. And by that, I mean, they've basically taken the normal model of parking lane next to the curb and bike lane and just flipped it so that the bike lane is between a curb and a parking lane to provide a physical separation. Now, there's some mixed messages that go on with this bike lane. They are protected from commercial vehicles and general double parking, which is nice, and it actually provides a physical separation. However, this biker probably is not visible to moving traffic. So as the biker on this slide approaches an intersection, they're gonna have to be extra cautious because they're just not seen. And we're working out the design of how this would look, but typically some of the concerns that are out there, especially in the city of Cambridge that they're implementing these, and full disclosure, I think 3 of the 4 are photos from Cambridge, and the top right is a photo from downtown Boston. What that is it's just, though this biker is separated, they might not be visible. So this is something that you want to make sure that if you're riding with a little one, especially because they might be smaller, they might not be that much less visible out there. You're going to want to make that extra known as you approach an intersection. And then lastly, the bottom left is what we call a cycle track, or a physically protected bike lane built in with the same grade as the sidewalk, which means it's taken out of the street level and put on the sidewalk level. The beauty of these is that it removes most of the conflicts with traffic, except for a little bit of turning traffic. But a little bit of the cons is that you can't go quite as fast on these infrastructures here, because you're basically going to be in conflict with some pedestrians who might wander or meander into the bike lanes. But in terms of pros and cons with riding with kids, I would say try to find the off-road pathway network the best as possible. So there's plenty of other infrastructure that we could talk about, but these are the main ones here.
Hi, Galen. We do have a couple of questions.
Yeah.
Before you go to your next slide. The question on the infrastructure. The one that where the bike lane is closest to the sidewalk, the lower right, coming out to, I guess, interact with other traffic. Is there would there be a caution sign, a stop sign, or?
Yeah, there should be some sort of notification for drivers to be wary. Sometimes the bike lane gets painted bright green, so it'll continue straight through an intersection in a bright green, so any turning traffic realizes they have to cross over that paint, which is an extra reinforcement to say that this is a bike lane. Sometimes there's a yield to turning vehicles yield to bikes sign, so we're seeing that. And sometimes there's an actual signalization of the bicyclist movement separate from the signalization of the car movement, so that especially in Cambridge, we're seeing this as a model where if you come to a red light or come to a stop sign, the biker will have a red, yellow, and green light with a bike symbol, which is triggered maybe 5 seconds or so before the rest of general traffic. So at a stop line, the bikers will stop at a red light, but then they'll be afforded the ability to get out into the intersection before the rest of traffic starts moving, so they're more visible. But I will say that's not by no means a guarantee. So sometimes these bike lanes just dump out at an intersection because the municipality doesn't have the funding to replace a signal, or maybe it's a quote pilot test and the engineers kind of only do about 90% of what they need to do. And I will say that this is also relatively new. Probably within the past couple of years, I'd say 5 years ago, this design didn't even exist anywhere in the Commonwealth, and now we're seeing it pop up more and more. So part of this is also to get into the culture of drivers and bikers that becomes more familiar, so that they start looking for it. Sorry, that's not like a direct answer, but it changes depending on the context, I would say, and depending on how far a municipality has gone down in terms of, really codifying this in their own design guidelines.
Okay, thank you. We do have a question from someone.
Great.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, Galen. My question actually was brought on by your comment about training wheels and how you don't recommend them. I was just a little surprised to hear that. And so I just wanted to clarify, do you not recommend them for any age? The reason I'm asking is my son is 4. He's actually never been on a bike before, but we're planning on getting him his first bike this weekend. So even for him, you don't recommend training wheels?
That's right, Courtney. Yeah, I would say if you can get away with no training wheels, even at age 4, they're not going to be able to feel comfortable pedaling quite yet. But the first thing I teach is kind of as the video demonstrated, was the kicking and scooting method.
Okay.
And
Yep.
once they learn that, they learn balance, and then there's no need for training wheels whatsoever. So if you can get away with no training wheels from the get-go, you're going to make your life a lot easier once you transition into the gliding, balancing, and then eventually the pedaling.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, and age 4 is a good age. I've seen as young as age 2, what they call scoot bikes. That's like SCOOT, or Strider bikes. These are basically the same, but they basically are bikes that are small. They don't even have pedals or gears at all. So there's not even the ability to pedal. So it's just about kicking and scooting. So you can start at a young age with the scooting. But as in my experience, I've taught countless kids of most ages and abilities, that even as they get older, and I'd say, you know, I've taught kids who are 8 years old, 9 years old, 10 years old, when they start to rely on training wheels, there is a fear of tipping over that they've never really gotten over. And that's a really hard barrier to get over if they're older and they're kind of bigger, and they might have already fallen a few times, so they're kind of scared already of falling, which is fair. So if you can start them off at the very day 0 of not even having to rely on training wheels, teach them that when they tip, they just got to put their foot down, and then you've already overcome that barrier.
Oh, that's a good tip. And the whole like getting over the fear of falling, it reminds me of the first time I went kayaking. The first thing we did was capsized, you know, flip over so that you learn this is what happens, this is what you do. So
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
cool.
Well, good.
Thank
Well,
you.
good luck.
Thank you.
Yeah. And little side note there, always have a little bit of sugar with you. So when the kid starts to bonk, you can give them a starburst and they can pop right back up. But of course, you know.
I like that one, Galen.
Great. All right, I guess I'll keep moving. So for the next few slides, we'll talk a little bit more about infrastructure in terms of routing and mapping. So now that we know what infrastructure is out there, I'm going to want to encourage you to think about where you live and where your destinations are, to the park, to the school, to the library, and think about what's the best way as a little one that you would want to get there. Now, of course, oh, and full disclosure, I'm just going to use the city of Cambridge as an example here, mainly because they've done the best job of most municipalities in terms of showing data around streets. So for an example, the next couple slides are really handy. First off, find the off-road pathway network. So if you're around Lexington, Boston, Cambridge, Somerville, Medford, and all the rest in the greater Boston area, we're really blessed by having an awesome off-street pathway network in terms of the bikeways. Now, unfortunately, they don't always connect. So I'm going to showcase here. Actually, I'll jump 2 slides in a second, I'll show you. But the beauty of Cambridge is that they've actually rated their streets in terms of stress levels. So we've got the whole city here in terms of 1 to 5, how stressful do the roadways and pathways feel? And this is based off of a 4-year study that the city of Cambridge did. Arguably, this is probably about 4 years old at this point. I think they released it in 2016 based off data that went from 2012 to 2016. They're just coming out with a new bike master plan in the next year or so. So this data will change, but this is just an example. When I take away stress levels 2 through 5, this is where the existing bicycle network, circa 2016, existed in the city of Cambridge. And you'll see it's a fair amount, but they don't connect. There's a lot of bits and pieces that are gaps. So this is something that you're going to want to focus on when you're looking at your own neighborhood is, you know, it's great to have the pathways, but you should also really focus on the gaps because, again, you know, a bike ride is only as safe or only as fun as its worst intersection, as its weakest link. So think about that, not just as the benefits, but where are the weak links. So one example I want to showcase here is that in the city of Cambridge, I've added the lower stress 1 and 2 streets along with the off-road networks. And you'll see if you're familiar with Cambridge that this is a lot of infill. This is a lot of neighborhood streets that don't even really have bike lanes, don't have separated bike lanes. Some of these don't even have share rows, but they might be comfortable and safe. So just because a street has a bike lane like Mass Ave means that it's in a higher stress level. Or if you're on Cambridge Street, it's got a bike lane, but it's high stress. And the reason that's high stress, of course, is because it's a bus route, it's a commercial truck route, it's a commercial zone, so there's going to be lots of turnover with parking. So you might want to think about, especially with youth, if you're going to be riding to the park or to the school, you're probably going to want to take some neighborhood roads, which then means that you can ride on the sidewalks if you like. And I'll talk about this in a minute about bike laws where you can and can't ride. But typically you can ride on the sidewalk in any non-business district. And if you're riding with a 10-year-old, or an 8-year-old, or even a 6-year-old, if you're that lucky, maybe the street isn't the safest and you're going to want to ride on the sidewalk, which means you're going to be riding in the neighborhoods. So think about using the neighborhood connectivities. And the beauty of biking is that you can explore on a bike, and it's easy to just hop a few blocks one direction or a few blocks another direction. You're still going to be getting to your destination around the same time because you're going to be going the same speed. And you might find a little connectivity in nooks and crannies. So maybe there's a cul-de-sac that empties into a footpath that takes you to a nice quiet boulevard that you would never drive on. And of course, there's no bus that goes there, so you might not even really know about it unless you go exploring on foot or on 2 wheels and kind of get creative in how you get from point A to point B. But again, with the high stress network, this is probably where you're familiar with driving, might not be the same routes that you would be taking if you were biking. So just to showcase, how would you think of your own roads in terms of stress levels? And of course, that changes based off time of day or based off the day of the week or based off the weather. But food for thought about getting creative. And typically, my suggestion is to find the off-road pathways and the infill of the neighborhood streets to get where you're going. All right.
And if you don't mind, Galen, I'm just going to give a plug for eCommuter.
Excellent. Good timing, Sophia. Go for it.
So eCommuter is also another tool that you can utilize to put in, or for it to give you the best bike routes. And so you can go in there and play around with it as well. And the routes put in where you're going to start and your end destination, and it will come up and show you the best way to get there via bicycling.
Great.
Okay.
eCommuter is a great tool. Yeah, and so check it out. One of the great resources from the TMA. So thank you, Sophia, for plugging that. And feel free to put that URL in the chat. And once I get control of my screen, maybe I can go to the website and everybody can see the interface. But yeah, great. Thank you for that. All right, let's talk about what is the rules and regulations of riding with kids. So most bike laws are state laws in terms of the regulations around how to ride and the legality behind it. The only local ordinances that really matter and pertain to your riding would be riding on the sidewalk, which is very important with kids, and where to park your bike. Those are local ordinances. Most everything else is state. And I'll preface this by saying you can always go to massbike.org/laws or under our resources tab on our website, and there's a summation of all of the bike laws for the state that pertain to your riding that you can check out. But the ones that really matter towards families is essentially the age and weight of a kid that can ride in a baby seat, as they call it. So essentially, any child under the age of 1 is not appropriate to ride in a kid seat, and technically is not supposed to be in a cargo bike or a trailer either. And the reason is, as I mentioned earlier, it's the helmet and the strength of the neck and the formation of the skull, which is the main concern around this. Now, I don't know when this law was put into place. I believe it was the late 70s. So the science aside, this is still the law. So if your child is less than 1 year old, you're going to have to wait until they get to 1, and then you're going to need to purchase a infant or toddler size helmet that fits their head, and then you can think about whether you want them to be in a kid seat or in a trailer. But if they're under the age of 1, you're going to have to wait. If they are 40 pounds or more, you're going to need to put them in a trailer or a cargo bike or the extra cycle like I showed earlier. If they're under 40 pounds, then a kid seat, either the front or the rear, can work. But just so you know, there's just a little bit of nuances. Now, I guarantee you most police officers have no idea about this law, which is not the point of this matter, but I just want you to know that there are regulations which you should be aware of and should be adhering to. And then, of course, there's all the other bike laws like stopping at stoplights, lights on at night, and all the rest, which you can go to massbike.org. But just so you know that there are ones related towards riding with little ones. And the reasons for the law are basically a little bit about safety on the roadways, a little bit less about the pathways, a little bit more about the roadways. So let's talk about some of the major dangers that we see out there that are not very common necessarily, but they are some of the most severe crashes that we see out there. So I have 3 different examples that I want to touch on here. So as your kid gets older, you're going to want to teach them the rules of the road well before they take an RMV class and well before they get their license. So keep in mind that though they might intuitively know how the roadways work because they've been a passenger or a pedestrian or even a bicyclist out there, there are some practical things that you need to actually sit them down and tell them about. So one of the first ones is going the same direction as traffic. So that top left image here shows 2 different things that I like. One is that the bicyclist is going the same direction as all motor vehicle traffic. The second is that the right way bicyclist, as opposed to the wrong way bicyclist, the right way bicyclist is predictable, is riding in a straight line that is not weaving. And this is not quite as intuitive as you might imagine, because most bikers, when they get the opportunity to get a little bit further from moving traffic, will take the opportunity to go towards the curb. Trouble is then there will be a merge out point where there will be some sort of conflict point, some blockage in the front. They will have to merge back out into moving traffic, which creates a negotiation with that driver, which again is an opportunity for conflict. Whereas if you were just riding in a straight and predictable line, the drivers behind you will recognize that and pass you accordingly. Secondly is the bottom picture, the door zone. When you're choosing your line and holding your line, you have to make sure it's about 4 feet, 3 to 4 feet away from parked cars. Now this one's a little tricky because to be a little bit further from parked cars mean that you're closer to the moving traffic, which is intimidating. However, I will say that a bike lane is about 5 feet wide. A painted bike lane with the symbol next to the parked car, next to moving traffic, that's about 5 feet in width, and that's the minimum standard. Anything less than 5 feet is not considered a bike lane, but being in New England, space is so tight that you really don't get more than 5 feet generally out there. Now, a car door, as it opens up, is about 3 feet, maybe even 4 feet if it's a big SUV or a truck. Now, the center of your bike to the edge of your handlebars is about 12 inches. So if you add up the car door length and the center of the bike, plus a little bit of wiggle room for the body, that is more than 5 feet. So if your bike lane is edged right up next to parking, this photo might not even be doing enough justice. I might want to think about riding on that farther out white line, which puts me closer to moving traffic. This is a challenge because we don't want people to feel like they are scared off the roads by moving traffic, but we want people to be aware and be out of the door zone. So if you're ever riding with kids, and this is for adults as well, you're going to need to be further out from car doors. If that is a challenge and a problem, and you don't feel safe on that road, again, going back to the safe comfort level of the street, you might want to pick a different street. You might want to pick a residential street which doesn't have a bike lane on it, which you might want to be able to ride on the sidewalk if you feel so necessary with a little one. So keep in mind that there are some nuances out there, and you don't have to ride in a bike lane. There's no law mandating that bikers need to stay within a bike lane. You have full rights and full responsibilities of being able to take a full travel lane, and you can also choose a sidewalk if it's a quiet enough district. So keep that in mind. And lastly, the photo on the right depicts what we call a right hook. Now, this is something that you're going to want to teach kids, especially if they're riding on the sidewalk, that right turning traffic might not be aware that a biker is trying to go through that intersection as well. And this kind of pertains to the question about when we were looking at the parking protected bike lane. The visibility is the biggest concern when you're hitting an intersection. And of course, you can imagine most crashes occur at intersections because that's where most of the moving pieces come into play. If I were this biker, and if I were to teach a young one, and I'm talking probably beyond age 10, if they're ever going to be riding with traffic, you're not going to want to be next to the traffic and the turning cars. You're going to want to be in the same line. So this biker is parallel to the traffic, as the bike lanes generally are. But if I were this biker, what I would do is I would signal, I would use my eyeballs to make eye contact, I would merge in with the traffic and be in the same line as traffic. And this is a tricky conversation to have, because as a young kid, you aren't really fast, you aren't strong, you aren't confident to feel like you can be part of traffic. So this is that gray area. And everything is context dependent. Everything depends on the type of intersection, the severity of traffic, the stress level at the moment. But keep in mind that if you are parallel and next to a turning vehicle, you run the risk of being in the right hook zone. And the only way to never get right hooked is to not be in that zone. Just like the only way to never be doored is to never be in the door zone. And this is a really hard conversation to have, because it really kind of reinforces what we call vehicular cycling, where somebody on a bike kind of treats themselves as if they were, you know, a 3,000-pound steel gas-powered car with airbags and protective measures, which bikers are not. So it's a delicate balance to have, but I really want you to be aware of these three major tips about, again, riding predictably and don't necessarily weave into the curb, riding predictably outside of the door zone, and riding predictably when you hit an intersection that you're very wary of the right hook. I can talk more about that, but I just wanted these three to be the ones there. I'll take a quick pause there and see if there are any questions or anything else that we want to throw out there, Kelly or Sophia, before I move on to the next slides. And I got about 2 slides left.
Sure. So we do have a couple polls left. We have you ever taught a kid to ride a bike, and how did you do it? And have you ever organized a community bike ride?
Let's do the first one first. I'm curious about teaching how to ride, because that pertains to this next slide.
Okay. So we're going to leave this open for about 30 seconds. We'll let everyone get their votes in. Have you ever taught a kid to ride a bike, and how did you do it? Yes, on a bike, no training wheels. Yes, with training wheels. Yes, on a scoot bike. No, I never have. And no, but I would like to.
Great.
So again, we'll leave this open for about 30 seconds. We'll let everyone pop back over and get their votes in. All right. Well, it looks like the votes are slowing down. So we're going to go ahead and close this poll. And it looks like we have 40% with training wheels and 60% saying no, but I'd like to.
Excellent. All right, good. Well, for those of you who learned on training wheels, I'm curious if you want to pop in the chat how the experience went. Did you have to, you know, for lack of a better term, break the habit of your young one who was relying on the training wheels and teach them how to do their own balancing? I'm curious. I'm very curious. So this chart is a very rough estimate chart, but for those of you who are looking to start to teach your young ones how to ride, you should know that the way that you get a appropriate sized bike is based off the wheel size of the bike. Now the wheel size will then pertain to the whole bike size, but it really comes down to wheels and not frame size when they get to be that little. So generally the first size is a 12-inch wheel, which is a pretty small wheel. And I believe that's the photo on the bottom right of the scoot bike there. You'll notice no pedals, not even the ability to pedal. This just teaches balance and steering. But a 12-inch wheel is for, you know, really little kids, ages 3, ages 4. But the idea that they should be able to put their feet on the ground and feel comfortable, but yet, you know, they should also be encouraged to be able to just kind of kick with the toes of their feet. So they do have to rely on their balance and not just catch themselves all the time when they're walking. You don't want them to walk with the bike, you really only want them to scoot. So kicking and then gliding. And then, you know, as the bikes get bigger, 16-inch wheels, 20-inch wheels, 24-inch wheels, and then you can get up to 26-inch wheels. Right around 24, that's like an interim size for, I'd say, about pre-teens. And that's when you can start to talk about hand brakes, where the hand lever actually activates as opposed to backpedaling of brakes. You might find a bike with gears. You know, these bikes generally are made with the same steel and the same componentry as good adult bikes, if you want to go that far. So these can be as expensive as an entry-level adult bike, or you can buy a relatively inexpensive one. However, just so you know, if you do go and buy from Target or the Walmarts, you're going to get a bike that will need repairs because it will break. Whereas if you buy a little bit more expensive of the Treks and the Specialized, which is the same as an adult brand that I would recommend, you're going to get higher quality, which arguably kids beat bikes a little bit more than adults do. So you're going to have a little easier time and probably save money in the long run by buying a little bit higher quality at the upfront cost and not having to fix. But it's up to you. You can also go on Craigslist, and I'm sure that your town has some Facebook groups for parents and neighborhoods, and there's lots of used bikes that can be purchased as well. But again, the idea about sizing is that your kid's going to grow, and they're going to grow out of their bike pretty quickly. So I would say test ride. But again, you know, your ideal bike is they're seated, their toes touch the ground, they can turn and lean without wobbling too much. You don't want to make it too big. You don't want to buy a bike that they have to grow into because that could be dangerous for them. But again, there's different varieties. You can start with a scoot bike, move on to a pedal bike, move on to a handbrake bike, and move on to a bike with gears. And then once you get to about the 26-inch wheel, that is about modern adult-sized mountain bikes. So, you know, depending on the age and how fast the kids are growing, you can actually go pretty quickly into 26-inch wheels. And then once you're there, you're kind of at the level of adult bikes, which is a whole plethora of options of qualities and frame types and all the rest. But again, your bike shop, your local bike shop, which should be able to help you out, no problem. We'll give you a bunch of bikes to test ride and make sure that your kid gets familiar with the bike so that you know it's the right size before you purchase it, if at all possible. All right. And then lastly, I think I have one more slide. There we go. My final slide I'll talk about is building the community. So one of the coolest things about riding with kids is that you are able to kind of make it a community event. And I know we're not riding to school quite yet, but when school goes back into session in whatever format, we're going to have a lot of concerns about people taking school buses or public transit. So riding your bike to school might actually be one of the best ways to be active, physically active, and yet maintain social distance and physical distancing, but yet getting to school safely. So this is where Mass Bike participates and helps run the Safe Routes to Schools program. Right now, everything is virtual. So the video we saw earlier was just like one brief example of some of the 20 or 30 videos that we're going to be producing specifically for school programs. But the idea of getting groups of kids out riding is probably the best ways to encourage them to ride, teach them good riding practices, because adults can kind of be there at the forefront to help guide them, to teach them about the direction of traffic, the doors, the intersections, and all the rest. And then they can kind of help reinforce each other's good behavior. I can talk a little bit more offline. I encourage you to get in touch with me and Mass Bike if you want to think about starting a biking school bus. But ideally, you work with some fellow parents, you work with the administration, you design a couple of routes like we talked about earlier, and you get some parents, and I would say, you know, no more than, 2 kids per adult or 3 kids per adult. So if you have a group of, 10 kids, you want to have at least 3 or 4 adults. And then you kind of get in the habit of riding. Maybe it's once a week, maybe you switch off and every day it's a different parent leading them. But the idea of making it fun and making it communal and as a community is really where I want to drive the rest of this conversation, so that you've got your kids riding, try to grow it as a neighborhood effort to really connect with the school systems, which I find the most gratifying. And even though I don't have kids myself, I ride with a bunch of other people's kids, and it's one of the most fun ways to really kind of get safety involved as well, is to teach good biking habits as a group. And I think I'll leave you with that. Happy to take any questions. I know we have one more poll, Kelly, if you want to throw that out there. And then I know we're just about at 1 p.m. So I'm happy to turn it over to everybody else.
Great, so we'll finish up with our last poll. Have you ever organized a community bike ride? So to school, at a bike rodeo, in a neighborhood. And we'll go ahead and leave this open for about 30 seconds. We'll let everyone get those votes in. All right, you guys were really quick about that, weren't you? So I'll go ahead and close this poll and share the results. So we have 50% that said no, they haven't. Some of you guys have, and some of you would like to start. So that's great.
Excellent. That's a good crowd.
Galen,
Well,
we do have one more question. How often should you perform a tune-up on your child's bike?
Ooh, good question. The balance bikes don't really need very much except for air. and the tires, because there's no cabling system for the brakes. The brakes are all on the foot for most bikes. So I would say, you know, for just balance bikes, all you really need to do is just squeeze the tires every time before you ride. And if you need a little air in there, just pump it up with a floor pump. If you have any questions about the ABCs, I know we've done recorded webinars with you in the past about the air, brakes, and chain. There's no chain on a scoot bike. There's probably no brakes on a scoot bike. So it really just comes down to the air. And for that, I would say every time before they ride, just give a quick squeeze. If they're a flat tire, they're not going to be able to roll. So that's defeating the purpose. But just put a little air in. And typically, my assumption is probably about 20 to 30 PSI in those tires. So they're not even very hard tires.
Okay. Julie or Kelly, are there any more questions in the chat or?
Nope, I have not seen any. I think the ones that we asked, Galen either already addressed or answered for us. So I think we're good.
Excellent.
Okay. Well, thank you, Galen, once again for presenting. You're always informative. And thank everyone for joining us on our Riding with Family webinar today. Again, my name is Sophia Gallimore. If you have questions about this webinar or Transaction Associates and the service we provide, you can reach me at sgallimore, G-A-L-I-M-O-R-E, at transactionassociates.com. And with that, we'd say bye and hope everyone enjoy this wonderful day. So get out there and start riding.
Happy biking,
Thank you,
everyone.
everyone for attending. Great.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.